picking kiwi fruit in the Bay of Plenty are usually from India or the Philippines. Mr. Maga says migrants accept such poor working conditions because they are often desperate.
You have to understand that some of these international students have been looking for jobs for a long time in order to pay for their food and accommodation. These companies, especially the labor hire companies, are trying to exploit this situation.
Dennis Maga says he's sick of hearing about investigations that show exploitation of migrant workers is not being stopped. The General Counsel at the Council of Trade Unions, Jeff Sissons, says the problem lies in the Labour Inspectorate being understaffed. He says there are about 60 inspectors for the whole country. In Australia, there's about 600.
It's too easy to get away with not complying with basic employment law in New Zealand. And that gets even easier when you're employing migrant workers because they might not know the legal system in New Zealand, might be really dependent on the employer for that job and worried about being deported if they lose the job. There's just not enough inspection in place to root out those bad employers.
Jeff Sissons says almost half the workers in the agriculture, forestry and fishing industries are migrants. He says he's sure many won't speak out about dodgy employers because they're scared they'll lose their job.
We'd like to see Immigration New Zealand taking a more pro-migrant worker stance and saying, if you come to us and report these things, you won't be deported while we investigate this stuff and we'll try and help you find another job in the industry.
The Labour Inspectorate's regional manager, Kevin Finnegan, says the investigation found more than half of the countries they looked into were failing to provide the minimum wage, correct holiday pay or even give workers written contracts. He says the way kiwi fruit pickers are paid often meant they weren't reaching minimum wage.
Harvesting in kiwi fruit, they're paid by the bin. If you don't manage to pick enough bins to receive the minimum hourly minimum wage, it has to be topped up by the contractor. So we found a few cases where that wasn't happening.
But he says the inspectorate hasn't gone back this year to check on companies they had investigated last year.
We will always have ongoing audit checks at various stages of the year. We didn't particularly focus on harvest in the Bay of Plenty this year, but we've been in other regions doing other different operations. But will always be a follow-up.
But not a follow-up this year?
We certainly haven't done a harvest one. It's not to say that we won't do other follow-ups.
Mr. Finnegan says there was one case of a company owing staff $25,000 that was paid back once the inspectorate raised the issue. He says it's likely the lack of written contracts is also disguising more cases of workers being shortchanged out of the minimum wage. Punishments dished out ranged from an improvement notice to immediate $1,000 fines, while one company is being taken to the Employment Relations Authority. For Morning Report, Ko Jacob McSweeney, Tēnei.
It's 21 and a half minutes to 8. Gareth Morgan's Opportunities Party wants young people aged from 18 to 23 to get $200 each week from the government, no questions asked about how they spend it. That's $10,000 a year. Gareth Morgan is in our Wellington studio. Also with us is inequality researcher and writer Max Rashbrook. Kia ora. Gareth Morgan,
Morning.
How much will this cost and where will the money come from?
$2.5 billion, and two of the 2.5 will come from cancelling the tax cuts that neither Stephen Joyce nor myself need, and the other half will come from the 1.5 ongoing budget surplus.
I'm slightly confused. Didn't you say that the capital gains tax would be offset by income tax cuts last December?
Yes, that's a separate issue. So
yeah, but that's income tax cuts, right?
Yeah. What we're doing, Kim, is major reform. It's a revolution, basically, of the tax and social security system. And we're bringing in the UBI component of that in stages. So the first one's off the block on the UBI with the over 65s. The second block was the families with very young children. And this is the third cab off the rank, which is the 18 to 23-year-olds.
You started off with a signature policy of a universal basic income. This is also UBI, but it's the unconditional basic income. Is this like baby steps now?
It's baby steps towards it. We've never announced a universal basic income as being, first up off the block for everybody. What we're doing is you're quite right, baby steps towards this. I'm obsessed with funding UBI. That was the big issue that
We need to be clear that when you say UBI, you mean universal or unconditional, because it's different, right?
Yes, yeah, it is. It'll end up being universal, but until it is universal, I tend to call it unconditional. I mean, it is unconditional in the sense that you don't have to, jump through any hoops. But the qualifying criteria as we go through these baby steps is predominantly age, old people and young people. They tend to be the two groups that are most in need. So we're doing it in priority of those in need. So as soon as we find some money somewhere to expand it, then we expand it the next step.
Max Rashbrook, you'd be in favour of a universal basic income in theory, wouldn't you?
Well, I think, like Gareth says, there's two components to it. There's the idea that it's unconditional, that you don't have to jump through any hoops to get it. And then there's the idea that it's universal, that it goes to absolutely everyone. I certainly agree there's really good evidence that, welfare payments should be unconditional, because the evidence is that people use them well and it removes a lot of very, intrusive testing into people's lives. The problem I get to sort of is around the universal element of it, because if you want to make this payment to everyone, and at the moment it's everyone in the group 18 to 23 that Gareth is talking about, but ultimately it will be everybody, it does get very expensive. And the sort of the trade-off that people make, and that obviously Gareth has made, is that to keep it, to try to keep it affordable, you pay it at something like $10,000 a year. But that's not enough for people to lead a life of dignity and participation in their community on. If you were going to, really, if people were relying on it and they're going to lead a decent life, it would need to be more about the rate that New Zealand Super is paid at, which is $20,000 a year, so twice what Gareth is proposing.
So you're saying enough is unaffordable and affordable is not enough?
That is the trade-off that classically the UBI proposals always struggle with, yeah.
Gareth Morgan?
Well, there is a moral hazard if you make the UBI up near the minimum wage. This UBI I'm talking about is under half, it's between a third and half of the minimum wage.
People won't want to work.
No, that's the moral hazard. So the main thing here, I think, is the main criticism I tend to be getting on this is, they're going to lie about drinking, or they're not going to turn up.
That's another moral hazard. Yes,
it's the same thing. Well, actually, the reality is the cost of doing work for a lot of these people in these low-wage jobs far exceeds the benefits they're getting from low-paid work. So this actually helps labour force participation because it covers some of the costs they have in getting jobs. I had a woman night before last in Tauranga, and the gig I did in Tauranga, and that lady was in tears. That was a solo mum, and she could not get into the workforce because she lost more on her benefits than she gained from the wage. And she said, I'm in a trap and I just can't get out of it. And there's a lot of people like that, Kim, and that's really one of the reasons, for UBI. It increases the ability to participate in the labour force. The other thing is, as some of the best brains in the world, whether they're Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, are telling you they are going to destroy so many jobs here. You better have a UBI lined up, otherwise you won't know what's hit you.
So it's for the uncertainty, the precariat.
It's the precariat. It's the ability of people to come in and out of the workforce. I mean, I agree with Max. I'd love it to be 20 grand a year, absolutely, but we have to fund it. So at the end of the day, once we get into that visionary world of Zuckerberg and so on, we would go to the people and say, well, if you want it to be 20 grand, this is the tax load. Your decision.
A lot of people would find it hard to accept that, as somebody said earlier this morning, a Lord and Lydia Ko are also going to get $200 a week. Do you think that the unconditionality of that, Max Rashbrook, overcomes the kind of visceral objection to people who are loaded getting another handout?
Well, again, you're back on those two separate issues of being unconditional and universal. So, I mean, what you can have...
Well, not really. I mean, if they're between the ages of 18 to 23, no matter how rich they are, they're going to get the cash, right?
Yeah, in the way that Gareth has proposed it.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Do you think that is all right?
What I would probably be more in favour of is what's called a guaranteed minimum income, which is where you do have the much higher benefit for those who need it, and it is unconditional, so that you remove that very intrusive and stigmatising regime of tests they have to go through. But then, like a lot of other benefits, it is gradually taken away from people as they earn more. Now, so the problem then is people do face high, effective marginal tax rates. But that is, welfare policy is always a set of trade-offs, and I would probably rather have a system where people who are utterly reliant on these benefits can actually lead a life of dignity and participation. You have to deal with some, them losing a lot of, not getting huge rewards from work immediately in order to provide that more generous support at the bottom and keep it affordable. But these are always trade-offs that you have to deal with. I don't think you can have a perfect system.
Yeah, I mean, Gareth Morgan, I can talk about the trade-offs. I can see that you have a holistic policy and that you say your flagship policy, an equitable tax on all income from capital and wealth is crucial.
Yeah.
If you don't get that, nothing else happens?
No, that's right. The flagship policy is absolutely number one. The reality is...
So it's like a house of cards, really, your
Well, it's
policy.
an integrated package.
I understand integrated, holistic, blah, but politics isn't like that, right? Politics
Well,
is pragmatic.
why don't we make...
Politics is trading this, as Max Rashbrook points out, a trade-off. You can't trade anything off, can you?
It's an integrated package that is for the 21st century. It's not a 1970s system that we keep reconditioning. So my view on this is it's completely rational, and when the public gets full information, it too is completely rational. So we'll see, shall we?
We shall.
Can I just come in quickly on the wealth tax side of thing?
Yep.
I mean, if Gareth's aim ultimately is to roll even his policy out to everyone, 10,000 a year to 3.5 million adults is, in the order of 35 billion. Okay, you'd have some savings elsewhere. If you, paid it at the rate, where people could live with dignity, it'd be 20,000 a year. You're up to 70 billion a year in a country where the government only spends about 95 billion a year on everything. So you do get into some, if that's the ultimate goal, you have to answer some pretty big questions about how it's affordable.
Well, I imagine you're both going to be looking with interest at the trials that are currently going on in places like Finland and Ontario. So we will watch those with bated breath, although the results won't come through before the election. Gareth Morgan and Max Rashbrook. It's 12 minutes to 8 on Morning Report.
And to politics in the US now. Republican efforts to approve new healthcare legislation have collapsed again after the last-minute defection of two...